I wasn't looking for another woman. That's the lie I told myself every morning, a bitter mantra swallowed with my coffee. After Chloe, I wasn't looking for anyone. My world had shrunk to the size of my small apartment, the glow of my laptop screen, and the hollow space in my bed. I was a ghost haunting the shell of a life, and my body felt like a stranger's house I was forced to occupy. That's why I was here, in this temple of sweat and steel, a place that smelled of rubber and disinfectant and exertion. I was trying to reclaim the territory of my own skin. The gym was small, tucked between a laundromat and a bakery, with none of the preening gloss of the big chains. It was quiet, functional, and run by a woman who moved with the silent economy of a predator. Her name was Anya. I knew this from the laminated staff board by the door. She was the only trainer. She had dark hair pulled back in a severe braid that fell between her shoulder blades, and eyes the color of a stormy sea. She rarely spoke, moving through the space to re-rack weights or wipe down a bench with an air of profound, unshakable calm. I watched her for 2 weeks from the relative safety of a treadmill, my heart thumping with a rhythm that had nothing to do with incline. I told myself it was professional curiosity. I told myself I needed guidance. The truth was, I was drawn to her stillness. She seemed anchored to the center of the earth, while I was drifting, untethered. So I decided on a plan, a tangible goal to mask the formless ache inside me. Progress. I needed to see it, to measure it. It was the only way to prove I was moving forward and not just in circles. That's how I found myself standing in front of her, my hands clammy, my voice a nervous squeak. Hi. I want to track my progress. For accountability, I gestured vaguely at my own body. I was wondering if you could take my measurements. Anya looked at me, her gray eyes unreadable. She didn't smile, but the corner of her mouth ticked up a fraction of an inch. She simply nodded, pulled a yellow tape measure from a drawer behind the desk, and said, in a voice lower and smoother than I'd expected, "All right, let's get your baseline." The word baseline hung in the air, feeling less like a fitness term and more like a diagnosis of my entire existence. This was my ground zero. The small office in the back of the gym felt like a confessional. It was spare, containing only a metal desk, 2 chairs, and a corkboard pinned with anatomical charts. It smelled of clean linen and something else, something faintly woodsy, like sandalwood. It was her scent. She closed the door, and the muted clang of weights from the main floor disappeared, leaving a silence that was suddenly, deafeningly intimate. "Okay," she said, her voice all business. "Arms first. Relax your bicep." I held my arm out, ramrod straight. She gently took my wrist, her fingers cool and firm, and repositioned it. "Relax," she repeated, her voice softer this time. A shiver traced its way up my spine. Every nerve ending felt like it was standing at attention. She unspooled the yellow tape, the soft plastic hissing in the quiet. Her proximity was overwhelming. I could see the faint constellation of freckles across the bridge of her nose, the way a few dark strands of hair had escaped her braid to curl at her temple. I forced myself to breathe. This was clinical. This was data collection. This was for my goal. But when the cool tape circled my arm, her knuckles brushing against my skin, my breath hitched. It was the first time someone had touched me with purpose, not passion or anger, in over a year. I felt a phantom ache where Chloe used to grip my arm too tightly during a fight. I flinched. Anya's eyes flicked up to mine, a question in their depths. "You okay?" "Fine," I said too quickly. "Just cold." She didn't press. She just nodded, her expression unreadable, and made a note on a clipboard. Chest. My heart hammered against my ribs. I crossed my arms instinctively. She waited, patient. I felt foolish. I dropped my arms, my cheeks burning. The tape slid across my back, under my arms, and over my sports bra. She was professional, her movements efficient, but I was hyper-aware of the space between us, of the warmth radiating from her body. Then came the waist, and finally the part one had both dreaded and, on some deep, mortifying level, fixated on. "Hips," she stated, her voice even. I stood frozen. This was the reason I'd concocted this whole ridiculous plan. It felt symbolic, measuring the part of myself I felt had been most scrutinized, most judged. Turn around. I did as I was told, my back to her. I heard her move, felt the air shift behind me. The tape slid around my hips, and her hands guided it into place over my glutes. Her fingers were firm, impersonal, yet it felt like being branded. My entire body went rigid. I was a statue, a collection of measurements on a clipboard. When she was done, she stepped back. Okay, that's it. We'll check again in 6 weeks. The appointment was over, but the ghost of her touch lingered, a strange heat under my skin. I mumbled a thank you and fled, the clinical encounter feeling more intimate than any date I'd ever been on. The gym became my sanctuary and my torture chamber. 3 times a week, I was under Anya's quiet supervision. Our sessions were the only fixed points in my drifting days. At first, I tried to keep a wall up, making dry, sarcastic jokes about my lack of coordination, trying to fill the space with noise so I wouldn't have to feel the pull of her silence. She'd just watch me, a flicker of amusement in her eyes, and calmly instruct, lower, slower, control the descent. She was forcing me to be present in my body, to pay attention to the burn in my muscles, the strain of the lift. She was teaching me control. I started to notice things. The way she chewed on her lower lip when she was concentrating on a client's form. The small, silver ring she wore on her thumb, worn smooth with time. The faded tattoo of a raven that peeked out from the cuff of her t-shirt when she demonstrated a shoulder press. I learned the rhythm of her breathing when she spotted me on a heavy bench press, a steady, calming counterpoint to my own ragged gasps. Her scent, that sandalwood and clean sweat, became a familiar comfort, a signal that I was in a place where I was, for 1 hour, safe from the chaos in my own head. I was getting stronger. I could feel it in the easy way I carried my groceries, in the solid new curve of my shoulders. But the change was more than physical. Being near Anya was like standing next to a low, steady fire. Her presence burned away the fog of my grief, forcing a clarity I hadn't felt in months. I found myself thinking about her outside the gym, wondering what her life was like, what she did when she wasn't effortlessly lifting more than I weighed. Did she have someone? A woman? A man? The thought of her with a man sent a strange, unpleasant pang through my chest. The thought of her with a woman. That was a door I refused to open. Chloe had slammed that door shut, bolted it, and set fire to the frame. I wasn't allowed to want that again. It was too dangerous. We rarely talked about anything personal. The conversations were limited to, how's your knee feeling this week? Or, make sure you're hydrating. It was a carefully constructed boundary, one I was too afraid to cross. I needed her to be my trainer, a symbol of discipline and structure. If she became a person, a woman I was undeniably, terrifyingly drawn to, the whole fragile scaffolding of my recovery would collapse. So I kept my distance, I built my walls higher, and I pretended the tremor in my hands when she adjusted my grip was just muscle fatigue. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. It was raining, a miserable, persistent drizzle that mirrored my mood. It was the anniversary of the day I'd moved out of the apartment I'd shared with Chloe. The day I'd packed my life into cardboard boxes while she watched, her arms crossed, her face a mask of cold indifference. The memory had been stalking me all day, a shadow at the edge of my vision. I pushed myself too hard at the gym, fueled by a self-destructive anger. On my last set of squats, my form faltered. My legs trembled. Drop it. Anya's voice was sharp, cutting through my haze. I didn't listen. I tried to push up, a wave of hot, useless tears blurring my vision. Now, she commanded, her hands already there, guiding the heavy bar back onto the safety pins of the rack. The weight clattered into place, the sound echoing in the nearly empty gym. I stumbled back, gasping, my legs feeling like jelly. The frustration, the grief, the sheer exhaustion of the past year crested inside me. I could have done it, I snapped, the words tasting like acid. You didn't need to interfere. Anya didn't react. She didn't get defensive or angry. She just stood there, watching me, her gray eyes filled with a deep, unnerving calm. She walked over to the water fountain, filled a bottle and walked back, holding it out to me. I stared at it, my chest heaving. I didn't take it. She placed it on the bench beside me and then sat down, a few feet away, her back straight, her hands resting on her knees. She just sat there, in the quiet while I fell apart. She didn't offer platitudes. She didn't tell me it would be okay. She simply shared the space with my pain, her silent presence a sturdy container for my unraveling. After a long time, my breathing evened out. The hot tears cooled on my cheeks. I finally reached for the water bottle, my hand shaking. "I'm sorry," I whispered, staring at the floor. "That wasn't. I'm having a bad day." She nodded, her gaze still fixed on a point across the room. "The bad days are when the real work gets done." Then she turned to look at me, and for the first time, I saw something beyond her professional reserve. I saw empathy. "It's okay not to be okay." I let out a shaky breath and told her. Not everything, but enough. I told her about the bad breakup, about feeling lost. I didn't name Chloe, I didn't give details, but I gave her a piece of my brokenness. She listened without interruption. When I was finished, a raw, vulnerable silence filled the air. I expected her to retreat, to put the professional wall back up. Instead, she offered a piece of herself in return. The wall between us, once so solid, had become permeable. After my disastrous squat session, something had irrevocably shifted. Our conversations started to stray from the rigid confines of fitness. As I stretched on the mats after a session, she'd linger, rolling her own shoulders. "My brother is a carpenter," she said one afternoon, out of the blue. "He says I have a thing for reclamation projects." She was watching me stretch, a wry, almost sad smile on her face. "I spend my weekends with a sander and a can of wood stain, taking something old and damaged, something someone else threw out, and finding the good grain underneath." She looked at me then, a directness in her gaze that made my stomach swoop. "It's quiet work. It takes patience." I understood the metaphor perfectly. I was her latest reclamation project. The thought should have made me angry, should have chafed at my pride. Instead, a strange warmth spread through my chest. She wasn't trying to fix me. Not in the way Chloe had, always trying to sand down my edges, to reshape me into someone more convenient for her. Anya was just seeing the potential, believing there was good grain underneath all my damage. She started sharing more small, curated details of her life. She told me about growing up in the countryside, about her love for stormy weather, about a stray cat she'd been feeding behind her apartment building. Each detail was a small, carefully offered gift, a thread she was weaving to connect our two separate worlds. I, in turn, started to open up. I told her about my job as a graphic designer, about my ridiculous love for old black and white movies, about my inability to keep a houseplant alive. We discovered a shared, dry wit, and soon our sessions were punctuated by quiet laughter. One evening, I was complaining about a particularly difficult client. He wants the logo to be professional but also fun and edgy, with a hint of nostalgia. I groaned, mimicking a pompous voice. Anya smirked, handing me a heavier dumbbell. "Sounds like he wants a mullet. Business in the front, party in the back." I snorted with laughter, the sound startling me. It had been so long since I'd laughed like that, a real, unforced laugh that came from my gut. The sound of it seemed to please her. A genuine smile transformed her face, softening her severe features and making my heart do a painful little flip. I was beginning to realize, with a sense of mounting panic, that this feeling wasn't just gratitude or friendship. It was the dangerous, familiar pull of attraction, a tide I had sworn I would never let carry me away again. The recognition hit me like a physical blow. It was a Thursday. The gym was quiet, the late afternoon sun slanting through the high windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Anya was spotting me on a row, her body close behind mine. She leaned in to correct my posture, her hand resting on the small of my back to guide the movement. Her other hand braced my shoulder. Her voice was a low murmur right beside my ear. "Pull from your lats. Squeeze your shoulder blades together." There. Her palm was a circle of intense heat against the thin fabric of my shirt. I could feel the individual pressure of each of her fingers. Her breath stirred the hair at my temple. The scent of sandalwood filled my senses, blotting out the smell of rubber and sweat. The rest of the world dissolved. There was only the heat of her hand, the sound of her breathing, the low vibration of her voice. My own breath caught in my throat. I completed the set on autopilot, my muscles moving through a memory while my mind was consumed by her proximity. I placed the weight down with a soft click. When I turned to face her, we were closer than I'd realized. I could see the flecks of green in her gray eyes. Her gaze wasn't that of a trainer anymore. It was intense, searching. The air between us crackled, thick with unspoken words. An almost moment, my lips parted. Her eyes dropped to my mouth. The spell was broken by the clang of a weight from across the gym. We both jumped, stepping back simultaneously, two magnets repelling. "Good set," she said, her voice a little rough. "Thanks," I mumbled, my face on fire. I couldn't look at her for the rest of the session. The invisible line had been crossed. We both knew it. I could no longer pretend this was just about fitness. I could no longer deny that I wanted this woman. This quiet, steady woman who had patiently found the good grain underneath all my splintered surfaces. And that terrified me more than any heavy weight I could ever lift. The 6 weeks were up. It was time for the follow-up measurements. The thought of it filled me with a mixture of intense dread and illicit excitement. The last time, I had been a nervous stranger. Now, the thought of her hands on me, even with the clinical buffer of a tape measure, sent a jolt of electricity through me. The denial was over. Every session for the past 2 weeks had been a tightrope walk of escalating tension. We were careful not to touch unless absolutely necessary. Our conversations were stilted, punctuated by long, charged silences. We were orbiting each other, caught in a gravitational pull, waiting for the inevitable collision. I met her after closing time. It was her idea. "It will be quieter," she'd said, which we both knew was a flimsy excuse. The gym was cavernous and still without the usual soundtrack of clanging weights and grunting effort. The only light came from the small office, casting long shadows across the empty floor. My footsteps echoed as I walked toward the light. She was waiting for me, leaning against the desk, the yellow tape measure coiled in her hand. She wasn't wearing her usual training gear, but a soft, gray sweater and dark jeans. Her hair was down, falling in dark waves around her shoulders. She looked soft, approachable. It made her even more dangerous. "Ready?" she asked, her voice quiet. I just nodded, unable to speak. The ritual began again, but this time, every movement was freighted with meaning. When she took my arm, her thumb stroked lightly over my pulse point. I had to clench my fists to keep from trembling. The air in the tiny office was thick, heavy. I was intensely aware of my own breathing, of the frantic beat of my heart. She moved with a deliberate slowness, her eyes holding mine for a beat too long as she recorded each number. Chest, waist. Each brush of her knuckles against my skin was a spark on dry tinder. Finally, she moved behind me for the last measurement. I held my breath. Her hands settled on my hips, much lower and more gently than before. The tape measure slid into place. But this time, her hands lingered. Her fingers spread, her palms resting against me. A gesture of possession, of comfort. I could feel the warmth of her seeping through my clothes, warming me from the inside out. I leaned back ever so slightly, an involuntary surrender. She didn't move away. Her breathing hitched, a tiny, almost inaudible sound. She was supposed to step back to record the number. She didn't. Instead, her hands slid from my hips to my waist, and she gently turned me to face her. The tape measure fell to the floor, forgotten. Her hands came up to frame my face, her thumbs stroking my jawline. Her gray eyes were dark with an emotion I couldn't name, but it mirrored the storm inside me. "Maya!" She whispered my name, and the sound of it on her lips was my undoing. "I can't do this," I breathed, the words a confession of fear. "Anya," I'm a mess. The last woman I was with. She broke me, the words tumbled out. A torrent of fear and pain I had held back for so long. She said I was too intense, that I felt things too much. She made me feel like my love was a burden. I can't be that for someone else again. Anya listened, her expression softening into something incredibly tender. She didn't recoil from my confession. She leaned closer. You're not a mess, she said, her voice a low, fierce whisper. You're a survivor. And anyone who made you feel like your feelings were a burden didn't deserve them. She searched my eyes. I felt it too, this thing between us, from that first day. And it doesn't scare me, she paused, her gaze unwavering. Nothing about you scares me. And then, she closed the small distance between us. Her lips were soft, hesitant at first, a question. I answered by leaning into her, my hands coming up to grip her sweater. The kiss deepened, a slow, desperate release of weeks of unspoken longing, of fear and hope and the terrifying, beautiful promise of a new beginning. It tasted of salt and relief, felt like coming home. The kiss ended, but we didn't pull apart. I rested my forehead against hers, my eyes closed, just breathing her in. The storm inside me had finally broken. This changes things, she said softly, her breath warm against my cheek. Professionally, I can't be your trainer anymore. There was no regret in her voice, only a statement of fact. I know, I whispered. It wasn't a loss. It was a trade-up, an exchange of a structured, safe relationship for something real and terrifying and infinitely more valuable. We stood there for a long time, wrapped in the quiet intimacy of the office, learning the new shape of us. Later, as we were getting ready to leave, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my sister, Jen. I'd mentioned to her last week that I'd been spending more time at the gym, that I'd met someone. Her reply finally came. Hope you're not getting tangled up in another one of your intense phases. Be careful, Maya. For a second, the old shame pricked at me. Chloe's words echoed in Jen's text. I felt Anya's eyes on me. She saw the flicker of doubt on my face. She reached out and took my hand, her fingers lacing through mine. The simple, solid gesture was an anchor. I looked at her, at the quiet strength in her face, and squeezed her hand. I typed back a simple reply. I am being careful. And I'm happy. It was the truest thing I'd written in a year. We walked out of the empty gym hand in hand. The cool night air felt clean, fresh. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and gleaming under the streetlights. We didn't talk about the future, about what would happen tomorrow or next week. For the first time, the uncertainty didn't feel like a chasm waiting to swallow me. It felt like an open road. I looked at our joined hands, at the way her fingers fit so perfectly with mine. I had come to this place looking to rebuild my body, and instead, she had shown me how to rebuild my hope. It was quiet work, took patience, but I could finally see the good grain underneath. When you've been taught that your love is a liability, how do you ever find the courage to offer it again? If you've ever had to fight your own heart to find happiness, let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories.